You've made it to section D of Module 2, where we'll begin to focus on student outcome goals. If you've been a school counselor for any length of time, you've probably heard that the school counseling profession has shifted from the question of what do school counselors do to the statement of how are students different or better off because of what school counselors do. The distinction between the two phrases doesn't seem like much, but it is. I've been in many meetings where school counselors share with their principals a long list of all of the things that they're doing, and they're all true. Counselors typically work long hours and skip lunch breaks, stay after school to catch up, or never use their contractual prep time. But unfortunately, in many of those conversations with principals, the list of what counselors do often comes off unintentionally, I admit, but kind of comes off sounding like, look how hard I'm working, when what the administrator really wants to know is, how are students better off because of your work? More specifically, administrators usually want to know, are students doing better academically? Is their attendance better? Are discipline referrals going down because of your work as a counselor? This isn't a criticism of counselors. It's just a simple truth. Measuring and sharing the results of your work as a counselor may be just as important as doing the actual work. And that's why CORE and other comprehensive counseling programs focus in on student outcome goals and outcomes in general. Maybe you shouldn't have to prove that counseling is worthwhile or valuable or effective, but unfortunately, the truth is otherwise. That's why one of the key strategies of an effective school counseling program is that you collect and report student outcome data, specifically on achievement, discipline, and attendance if you can. Now, as we begin to focus on the goals of your school counseling program, it's important to understand the three types of data you'll be gathering and sharing here in CORE. The first set of data is called student learning objective data. This data asks, did students learn anything from the classroom lesson I just taught or the small group counseling sessions you held? Did their knowledge or skills or attitudes change as a result of that classroom presentation? Surprisingly, this is fairly easy data to collect, typically through a student pretest and post-test given before and after your classroom presentation or any of your small group sessions. Pretests and post-tests don't have to have a lot of questions, maybe 3 to 5 questions at the most, but using them helps you show how you've moved the needle on these student learning objectives, the things you want students to know, to do, or believe as a result of your work with students. Again, this is sometimes called proximal data because it's the student data that you can directly affect through your interactions with students. Typically, your student learning objectives relate to the next type of data you will collect, which is data related to your school counseling program's student standards that you identified in Module 1. This is also relatively easy data to collect. If you choose ASCA's mindsets and behaviors as your counseling program standards for students, collecting this data is easy by using our Student Success Needs Assessment instrument, available free of charge in CORE, because the questions directly correlate to ASCA's mindsets and behaviors, their student standards. And CORE also allows you the flexibility to administer your own student needs assessment at the beginning or end of each school year to see if your counseling program is getting more students to master the standards that you have identified locally. The third type of data is called student outcome data. This is data specifically related to 3 things, either student achievement, student discipline, and/or student attendance. Student outcome data is more discrete or quantitative. That's why it's sometimes called hard data and can include student achievement data like state assessment scores or student grades or GPAs, plus any attendance or discipline data that your school collects. Student outcome data is often the easiest to collect, but typically the most difficult data for school counselors to impact. The hope is that by presenting small group or classroom lessons that impact your student learning objectives, things you want students to know, believe, and do, or demonstrate as a skill, that those results help students get closer to meeting your school counseling program's student standards in the areas of academics and social emotional well-being and college and career readiness. And by influencing these 2 types of data, you will positively impact student outcome data in either achievement, discipline, attendance, or all 3. This is important because even though counselors have an indirect effect on student outcome data, this third set of data is often the data that parents and administrators especially want to know most. They want to know, does your work as a school counselor have an impact on student outcome data in either academic achievement or behavior or attendance? It's for these reasons that the Ask a National model specifically focuses on this third set of data most, the student outcome data, and only student outcome data in the areas of what I call the big three: student achievement, student attendance, or student discipline. This approach to collecting and reporting data may be a little worrisome to you. It was to me at first, frankly. Why should we focus on data that counselors can only impact indirectly? And what happens, this is important, what happens if you can't show a correlation between what you do as a counselor and improvement in attendance or achievement or behavior? And worse, what if that data is used to evaluate you and other counselors in your school counseling program? These are all valid concerns, but they can be addressed proactively depending on your approach. Let me explain. Typically, when school counseling programs look at data, we start by asking what lessons we need to cover this year in our school counseling program to address the biggest needs of students, the social emotional needs, or explain the most recent scheduling changes, or convey new college or career or financial aid information. We often think in terms of what do students need most in the areas of social emotional well-being or college and career readiness, much like steps 1 and 2 in this graph. We start on the left by considering what we do best, then how our work can address student needs, and last, if our work happens to impact academic achievement or discipline or attendance, well, that's great. But we usually don't check on that because it's hard to correlate what we do with those big outcomes. In contrast, the approach of a comprehensive counseling program is starting by looking at the right side of this graphic first, at the student data that's most important to administrators and parents, not necessarily data most important to counselors or the counseling program. Almost always, the data most important to parents and administrators relates to achievement or discipline or attendance or all three. In a comprehensive counseling model, you review that data first, identifying the highest priority needs of students in one or more of those big three student outcome areas, then work backwards, so to speak, or moving to the left on this graphic, to brainstorm the underlying root causes of the attendance, discipline, or achievement issues, ideally with the help of your administrators and stakeholders. And as a last step, you consider what the school counseling program can do to positively impact the root causes in order to positively improve student achievement, discipline, and attendance. In terms of the actual work you do as school counselors, there's not much difference. The biggest change is in the approach and how you convey what you're doing to others. Now, this does not mean that positively impacting students' social emotional well-being or delivering career and post-secondary readiness to students is unimportant. Not at all. Rather, it's shifting the question to how can our efforts in improving student social emotional well-being or scheduling or career and post-secondary readiness, how can all of those efforts also affect student achievement or discipline or student attendance? If you can bear with this approach, your first step in creating your annual student outcome goals is to locate the most recent and most accessible student data in the areas of achievement, discipline, and/or attendance from your school data source. Ideally, if possible, find and use student data that is disaggregated by student group, such as by gender or ethnicity, socioeconomic status, learning disability, and other categories. Check first to see if your school's own student information system has that data so you can access it. Or you may be able to find your school's data on a state website. For example, in Indiana, there's a set of achievement, discipline, and attendance data for every school in the state via the NView website. You'll also want to locate and review your school's improvement plan or the stated goals of your school for education. This is step 8 on your core to-do list. It's wise to review your school's improvement plan for obvious reasons, but especially to get a better idea of what your principal or administrative staff and community feel are the most important student needs and student data to focus on. If it's your first year of core, or you just can't buy into the premise of focusing your goals only on one of the big three, achievement, discipline, or attendance, you have the flexibility to review and use the student perception data from your annual student success needs assessment or other student data that may not be achievement, attendance, or behavior related. That decision is totally up to you. Remember though, if you ever apply for the RAMP award, the only data you can use for your student outcome goals is in the area of attendance, discipline, or student achievement. Now, no matter what data you choose to examine, here are a couple of data basics to follow. First, look for gaps or troubling trends or discrepancies in the data that indicate needs of some student groups over others. ASCA calls this closing the gap data. For example, you might find new and transfer student GPAs are lower than native students, or your fourth grade students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds have higher absentee rates, or state standardized test scores are lower for one ethnicity over another. Second, remember you are identifying student data, not data about the school or students' parents or the counseling program. You're looking at student data. When you get to step 9, clicking on the pencil icon will take you to this page, where you will be asked to pinpoint and enter at least 2 all the way up to 5 data points that you feel are most compelling to consider as your counseling program's goals for this year. You will likely only use 1 or 2 of these priority data points to set your actual goals, but this practice helps you and allows your team to examine and consider several pieces of student data that you find before pinpointing 1 or 2 in order to develop your priority goals. When you're listing your data points, be sure to identify quantifiable data as much as possible. Data expressed in terms of numbers or percentages, again, to the extent possible. Using our previous example about lower GPAs for new and transfer students, for example, the quantifiable data you want to record is the average GPA of the new and transfer students. What is that average GPA? And for the second example, how many of your fourth grade students from lower socioeconomic status homes have higher absentee rates? And what is the absentee rate percentage? As you locate the data, enter it into each of the data points in step 9, the data entry page, in the same way. For our first example, your data point might be expressed this way. The new and transfer student average GPAs are 2.39. This would be the data you want to move or improve through your annual student outcome goal. From the drop-down box, you would choose this as achievement data. The second example might be expressed this way. 7 lower socioeconomic status fourth grade students have an absentee rate above 25%. And from the drop-down box, of course, you would choose attendance. This may take some getting used to, but give it a try. Remember, you not only want to use numbers or percentages, you will want to be very specific about the student group you choose for your goal. Doing both of these things will be a huge help when you begin writing your student outcome goals in the next section. Now, I know this is a lot, but one last note. You don't have to find data in every data category. Your data points may only be achievement-oriented or only attendance or only discipline, and that's perfectly fine. Now, I've spent a long time giving you context. The next 3 steps in Module 2, steps 8 through 10, should go fairly quickly. Start by reviewing student data that you find and can find relatively easy and quickly. Then go to step 9, click the pencil icon, and enter up to 5 data points that you have identified as most compelling. Then go to step 10, where you will simply select 1 or 2 of your priority data points that will become part of your school counseling program's student outcome goals. Complete these steps, and when you're done, go on to step 11 and watch the video there, where we'll walk you through the next steps in creating your student outcome goals.